Welcome to the Diversity Pivot Podcast. This season, we are talking with leaders inside organizations focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're talking with them about best practices and proven tools for positive change. We are also sharing vignettes from our new book, Allyship in Action, to help leaders take real, tangible action on DEI right away. This work is important because all humans need to feel seen, heard, and belonging in the workplace. Hello, all. We have an exciting guest. Mita Mallick is joining us today, and Mita comes to us as a corporate change maker with a track record of transforming businesses. She gives innovative ideas of voice and serves customers and communities with purpose. She's currently the head of inclusion, equity, and impact at Carta, and was formerly with Unilever as the head of inclusion and cross-cultural marketing. She has an extensive career as a marketer in the beauty and consumer product space, and is also a LinkedIn top voice contributor for Entrepreneur and Harvard Business Review, and her writing's been published in Adweek, Fast Company, and Business Insider. She's also the co-host of the recently launched The Brown Table Talk podcast, where she and Dee Marshall share stories and tips on how women of color can win at work and advice for allies on how to show up. Hey, Mita.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me, or thanks for being with me, rather.
Yes.
Mita, I love following you on LinkedIn. So listeners, first actionable tip, follow Mita. She posts such amazing content, newsworthy programs, things about just representation and why it matters. I'm curious, Mita, to just start with your story on how you found your passion for DEI. How did you get involved in this space?
I think my passion found me. I'm the proud daughter of Indian immigrant parents. I was born and raised in the US with my younger brother. I grew up outside of Boston, and I was the funny looking, dark-skinned girl with a funny looking long braid whose parents spoke funny English until it wasn't funny anymore. I was bullied a lot, both verbally and growing up. I know how it feels like, just physically, emotionally, mentally, to feel like you don't belong. And the sad truth is I never expected those bullies from schoolyards and classrooms to follow me into corporate America. So I'm on a mission to help everyone find their voice, because when you find your voice, you never stop using it, and to create cultures where we all feel like we can show up and be the best version of ourselves.
Yeah, the childhood stories. I mean, those really haunt me when I read about them and absorb them. And being a white girl growing up, we all experience just the adversity of humanity, but the stories are very different for folks of color, for especially first generation immigrants. Everything from the food you eat to how you wear your hair to just being different. And sometimes as a kid, we always want to fit in, right? But we want to conform, sometimes twist ourselves in ways that as adults, luckily, we a lot of times can find our way into appreciating and wanting to be different, but we don't always have that freedom as a child. And I know that really resonates with me, and it's a huge passion area for me in the work as well. So I appreciate that, Mita. I want to know about the work you're doing first in corporate. So, at Carta, what are you seeing as the issues that need to be dealt with the most with DEI right now?
I think the biggest thing that we're all chasing in the marketplace is inclusive cultures.
Yeah.
Every organization is on a journey to be a more inclusive organization. And the truth is, it's N of one. It starts with each and every one of us. A company is made up of people. It's those individuals who have to think about how they show up every single day. How I show up every single day, Julie, at Carta with my team, outside of Carta, at home. It has a ripple effect on the people who I'm with, positively or negatively. And so I'm really focused on how can you show up as an inclusive leader? And that's a continuum. That's not a destination, right? What are the things that you should be doing? And what are the things that you should be thinking about, especially as we talk about what's happening not only, in the US, but globally? This whole idea of, I say, not the Great Resignation, but as I wrote about in Fast Company, it's the Great Awakening. Or
Mm-hmm.
people
I love that.
reevaluating what they will and will not tolerate anymore from their organizations.
Yeah, I love that awakening. Yeah, that the resignation really got a big push in the media.
Yes.
Everyone's been saying
Well,
for
the great reshuffle, the
yeah,
great resignation, the great
renewal.
awakening, renewal. Yeah. Grease reset. Yeah. There's a lot of
All
good
putting our
titles out
spin on
there.
it. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. But you're right. I mean, employers are not in charge anymore. Employees are, and accepting that an inclusive workplace culture is really, I think you could have said before the pandemic it was a nice to have. I would argue was never, but it's a must have now to be competitive with top talent and to get the most from your leaders. And we're approaching such high levels of burnout, especially of women and people of color that have just been through so much in the last few years. Um, Having that inclusive workplace is so critical. Mita, when you think about inclusive culture, what does that mean to you?
What it means to me, I'll just be very personal about it. I want to work somewhere where I feel seen, I feel valued, I feel heard, my contributions matter, I get credit for my work. People are investing in me as much as I'm investing in the
Mm,
company. They're just all sort of, I would say, on some level, basic needs of how people want to feel.
yeah.
And our me as a worker, as an employee, it's the relationship I have with my boss and the company. It's just like any other relationship. You want to be respected, you want to be valued. And I will tell you, you cannot place a dollar amount on respect and value and feeling like you belong and you matter. I'm not
Yeah.
going to leave for another $20,000. I just won't if I have that somewhere because
Yeah.
that's priceless. It's priceless.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at some point, there's a lot of research on this too, like what really brings happiness to folks. I think we used to think monetary means benefits, and employers were so
Yes.
good to make it all transactional, like, oh, you're going to get paid this, and it's like the most competitive salary, and our benefits are the best, and da 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 da. And what really, once people have enough financially to really, take care of themselves and live the kind of life they want, increasing salary and benefits even doesn't really mean that much to
It
people.
doesn't. And culture is not about, like you're saying, the wellness benefit, the meditation app, the fancy snacks. Culture is also about constantly overscheduling my lunch, ignoring my vacation, asking me to work on vacation,
Yep.
publicly shaming me when I take mistakes, continuing to pile work on as others have resigned and not stopping projects, asking parents to come back early from parental leave.
Oh, that's so gross.
This is all culture.
Yep.
So all of these things, it's actually the really micro moments, the small moments that define culture. It's not, as you say, all these perks and benefits that we're all chasing, thinking are going to keep me. No, it's how I am treated day to day in those everyday interactions. And I am not a frontline worker. A big shout out and thank you to everyone who's helping keep our economy going. I have the privilege and have had the privilege of working from home from the last 2 years. So a lot of this is happening in Zoom rooms that many aren't
Mm-hmm.
seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Many aren't seeing.
Yeah. And I know you bring your kiddos into the
Yeah.
conversation. I love that. I love those are my favorite posts when your kids, it's just everything. And I can relate. Yeah, I've been working from home. I had the luxury, the privilege of working from home before the pandemic. So it wasn't that huge of a shift for me. I mean, not getting on airplanes and traveling, that was obviously a big one, but being home every single day with little ones running around your house and
Yeah.
homeschooling and getting your
Yep.
work done. Have you learned in your own personal journey about managing all the things?
I'm still learning. I'm still learning. I think be kind to yourself. I am often not very kind to myself. And I'll say that and it shows up in obviously what I eat, what I drink,
Yeah.
how much I'm sleeping. They're all those things, right? But it's also the self-talk, the negative doubt. I'm failing my children. I'm a mom failure.
Hmm.
Other women in my life didn't have a choice. They had to put their families first. I just want to be clear. There was no choice.
Yep.
We are now back to, as you know, Julie, workforce participation rates for women in the US labor force that we haven't seen since the 1980s. So 4 decades of progress that has been wiped out, which is a huge conversation that needs to happen and continue to happen in our work. But I'm often so unkind to myself in terms of the self-talk and the self-doubt and that inner voice. And I think that's also why I had started to spend more time on LinkedIn, because I was also looking for community and feeling really isolated and alone. And while we were all isolated, we weren't alone, because so many of us, as you just described, you describing that was my life, right? I'm like the failed summer camp counselor, the virtual teacher, the chief entertainment officer, the laundress, the cook, the referee. Any moment, I'll never forget being on a call with somebody very senior at work, and he just heard this wail, because I think my daughter had jumped on my son, like, oh, like a whale. And you're like, yep, that's it. Something's happening upstairs. Let's keep
Yep, I heard it too. Moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this, the dual, all the intricacies of life that women, oftentimes, not always being the primary caregivers, have had to do in private and secrecy. And now it's all out there. Well, for some, not for all, on a Zoom screen. And you're doing all the things, like you said, all the different roles, just being kind to yourself. One mantra I've really gotten behind lately that's helped me a lot is, I did my best today. Like, I did my best.
I love that. I love that. I love that.
And, some days, honestly, I might not have done my best. I mean, not every day is a gold star.
I'm going to steal that, Julie. I'm stealing that.
And it just, a few best self-care practices I've taken on. I know by no means arrived at this myself. I have so much to learn, as we all do, but like you said, healthy sleep. Like, I record my sleep now, and my goal is 8 hours a night. Yes. And I don't think that's lazy. I think my brain really needs that to replenish itself. And I feel better when I have my 8 hours of sleep. And food. Yeah. What we put in our bodies, just being really mindful of real food and food that helps. I have digestive issues. I have to be pretty careful about what I put in my body. And my daily walk and bath, like my saving graces at the end of the day. Cause DEI work, I venture to say it's like 2x a normal day. Like a normal hour of DEI is like 2 hours of something else. Like, it's just taxing. It takes a lot of mental energy. It's really complex. There's so many mistakes you can make, and so much learning. So I've given myself a shorter workday and provided some grace with, some self-care, and just that mantra when I go on my walk and I just listen, to other people and other challenges and experts, and say, I did my best today. I did my best.
I love that. I said, I'm stealing it. I'll credit you, but I'm stealing it.
I think I'm sure I got it from a book, Mita. So I'm by no means, I borrow from other people shamelessly all the time.
Good reminder. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, and I want to shift gears. I love this conversation about inclusive culture and, the challenges of women are facing. And yes, that 4 decades stat is super disturbing. And the fact that we're not talking about it also really bothers me. It's like, we're just accepting, like, oh yeah, the pandemic was hard on women, like, moving on. Like, there has to be some reckoning there. So corporate America, please wake up. But I want to shift gears to the brown table talk. I just love the topics you and Dee are tackling. They are so like, there's a lot of DEI podcasts out there that, talk about the business case and empathy, and, I'm one of those. But I mean, you're tackling some really meaty topics, like a pet to threat, tokenism, visibility, feedback, that when someone touches your hair, I just love these topics. So Mita, tell us more about how you and Dee started this, and talk more about how you come up with these topics. I'd love to know more about your creative process.
Well, thanks for asking. We're following in your footsteps of the podcasting world. Dee and I met at the Multicultural Women's Conference in New York City in 2017. And we just immediately sparked and connected. I hired her to be my coach at the time. She also started coaching members of my team. And I was going through a really difficult time at work in a bullying harassment situation with an incredibly toxic leader. And I always joke that Dee's the client I can't get rid of. We worked together over the years and we just became really good friends. And our podcast is really a celebration of our friendship. And more importantly, just the stories and struggles of what women of color face in the workplace, and how we can go from surviving to thriving. And really, Julie, we can't do that without allies. And so it is the brown table talk where we unpack it all and we share a lot of the stories and things that we've been through. And I always try to think about these things that happened in my career and continue to happen. What do I wish someone would have done for me? And how could they have shown up for me? And how do I want to show up from others? And so we always leave tips at the end. But back to your question of like how we pick the topics. I mean, there are stories. And, I am a creative. I enjoy writing. And these aren't made up stories.
No.
These are stories that have happened to not just me. I mean, I have people who reached out after season 1 and said to me, it's like you're reading my journal. Women of color who then that stays heavy with you. This happened to me too. Oh my gosh. And then a number of white men reaching out to me saying, one in particular who's a friend said, I had no idea you were going through all this stuff. Like, I wish I could have shown up for you differently. And I said, well, I wasn't talking about these things then. And so, yeah. And so we self-funded it. We were really excited about it. We were like, this is going to be a limited series. And then LinkedIn called last year, which was really awesome. They started a podcast network, the LinkedIn Podcast Network, that just got announced that we are one of, I think, 11 shows that they are supporting in the new network.
So cool.
Thank you. So that's like a dream come true to be able to be on a bigger platform. And as you said, got a lot of topics we can talk about, but anyone who's starting season 2 with us, we just launched one of our episodes is what to do when someone touches your hair. I think that's a really important one because Black women disproportionately have their hair touched at work and outside of work. I really want allies to listen to this.
Yeah.
To say, like, have you ever touched someone's hair, a Black woman's hair, without asking? Have you seen it happen and not done anything? And did you not think it was a big deal? Like, just to be really honest with ourselves. And so, like you said, we're going in hot. We have a lot of juicy topics. And as someone said to me, we take no prisoners. Which
You're not holding back.
I'll let you be the judge of that. Yes.
No, that's so good. Yeah, this was several years ago when I remember a Black woman first shared that with me. Yeah, people touched my hair and I was like, what? I was like, I almost like disbelief, like what? And I was like, no one touches my hair. Like, why would someone do that? And then as they explained it, and then of course, every woman of color I think I've ever met has been like, yep, happened last week. Like it's like so common. That it was just this initial like shock. And I think with a lot of your topics, especially for well-intentioned allies, especially for white men, it's just like, that doesn't happen to me. Right. And sometimes our instant reaction is to like not believe. And I actually think as an ally, it's like, believe people when they share your
believe me, please believe me. That's what I always say. I wish more people would have believed me. That's all.
And don't reshame somebody like, well, what were you doing? Or why would someone do that to you? What were you? Yeah. Well, it's just like, that's irrelevant. Like, don't re-victimize somebody. They're sharing their story with you. Chances are it's true. Why would they make it up? Especially if it's just, you hear that story more than once. There's obvious truth to that and lived experience to that. One in particular. So the topic I love on your podcast is the pet to threat stereotype. And this is just something I just learned about. Mita. I was thinking of you both. Mita, I wonder, like, can you explain what that is, what this phenomenon is, pet to threat, and how it shows up and what to do as an ally?
Thank you, Julie, for particularly choosing that topic because it's one that doesn't get talked enough about. And I do not claim to have coined that term. The pet to threat was actually something that was a study that I believe came back out in 2013. And it was the associate dean of the University of Georgia who, upon research, came up with coined this term. And it predominantly, when she talks about the study, it's when it happens to Black women at work, when they come from being the pet to the threat. And I talk about how it showed up for me at work as a woman of color. And it's this notion that you're hired for your talents and your contributions, and you are the pet, you're the golden child. And then all of a sudden, when, as I say, I'm just trying to do right by me, by my boss, by the company, I shine, you shine, all of a sudden you're perceived as a threat as you start to perform. And as it's like, oh, well, oh, this person could actually be in the C-suite? Huh. No. And then
Exactly.
that's
It's
when
like all of
the,
a sudden, like, oh, you're
yeah,
competing with me. I thought you were less than me.
yes. And that's when the gaslighting, bullying, and harassing in particular had started for me. And I share in the episode, which I hope everyone will tune into. But I had this moment where I was asked to be on stage in front of our top 200 leaders to do an hour and a half presentation workshop. And I'll never forget, my then boss was the one who had nominated me and asked me to do it. I'll never forget showing up into his office like a week later after this offsite. And he just sat me down and he just looked at me and said, you know, you're not supposed to be this good.
Oh, jeez.
You know, at your level, you're not supposed to be this good. And that was in response to the offsite that I had. I know I killed it. Like I did a really great job. And I know that because other people had come up to me. And that was the response. And that slowly was the beginning of the gaslighting and bullying that would ensue in that relationship. But it did come from this idea of like, I was the pet, or I was the office pet. And then all of a sudden I was seen as a threat. And I wish that I was alone in that story. I know I'm not. I know I'm not alone.
Yeah. It's so surreal to think about that happening. And once it was explained to me, I realized how true that was, right? And I think for folks, well-intentioned folks in the majority group, it's always fine to be an ally as long as the person's less than me. And this isn't real allyship. That's definitely performative or not even the guise of allyship. But it's like I feel comfortable as long as that person's like junior, right? And I maintain my status. And then all of a sudden, when it becomes a challenge, and there's no zero sum game here, but in people's minds, that fear of like, oh, shoot, she might be better than me, right? Like, oh, she might overtake me.
Yes.
Now you're the threat. And that's such a weird power structure that's so unfortunate yet so common in
So
corporate.
horrible and it's so detrimental and can have
Oh,
had devastating impact on my sense of self-worth and self-confidence. And what I don't understand is what I know what you also prescribe to and think about is servant leadership and thinking about like if
mhm.
I shine, you shine. If
Yep.
my team shines, that's amazing. And that's a reflection of me because I'm leading the team.
Hmm.
And I wish more leaders would think about that. I wish the former boss would have thought about it that way.
Yeah.
If I'm doing great, it's reflecting on him
Yeah.
because I'm on the team. And yet, for some people who are still thinking about the workplace as incredibly hierarchical and using an old playbook, they don't get it, right? They just think the boss is sitting on top of the pyramid,
Ew.
right?
Ew.
That's the top, right? You're at the top and everyone else is like beneath them. And the world has changed. It continues to change.
Yeah.
That's not a workplace I want to be a part of.
Power over. And allies, I think the big distinction with real allies, what I call active allies, is power with, like sharing the
Absolutely.
power. So the more power I get, the more I can share back. And that's something I've really been reflecting on recently, Mita, as you share that story, is like, how can I do better by sharing what I have with others? Like,
Mhm.
and the secret to that too is like, it also makes you happier sharing it with others.
It does.
Hoarding it.
And I really want to thank you for having me come on your podcast because as soon as you knew I started a podcast, you said, please come and join me on my platform so I can share what you're doing. And I hope more people will follow in your example because we all have something to give and share to others.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. That's very kind. Honestly, it's so helpful to have folks like you that have such great, tremendous audiences too. So it's mutually beneficial, right? Like you look at like other podcasts that have similar other speakers, people in the DI space. Is things sometimes we think like, oh well, if other people come in, then there's not as much room for me. Like it's just not. It doesn't work that way. The more we come in, the more we can help each other, and the stronger we are together. And so I think it's the root of that is like insecurity. I'm not sure where people go in their mind when they think of that us against them mentality. But I know, especially as a white woman, I have to be really cognizant of the mistakes people like me have made in this conversation. And so if I trigger somebody with something I say that's not well thought out, or, when I tackle tough subjects, I know the what I want to do is armor up and protect myself. Like Brene Brown would say, like take the armor down and lean in. And it's like still really hard. So there's just so many nuances to this conversation, Mita. I'd love to know, just in kind of wrapping up, what do you see on the horizon for DEI? Like where are things going? If we had a magic ball, what would the future look like?
Well, I know what the future looks like today. We know with the diversity tipping point, which my friend
Yep.
D. Marshall coined of 2022. I don't think there's any going back. Also, the stats from a business perspective, and I believe inclusion is a driver of the business, which is why I do this work. It's not separate, it is a part of the business.
Sure.
You look at the US stats alone from Nielsen, there's $3.2 billion of spending power with the multicultural consumer. So for any company who still has briefs that general market coded language, or this is for the 18 to 55-year-old white woman, Caucasian woman, I don't know if they're going to be in business in 10 years,
Yep.
right? If you don't have a strategy to think about how to reach all of the communities that we need to serve.
Yep.
And how you're doing that intentionally. And again, you don't want to diversity wash and try to reach everyone. That's not what I'm saying, but be intentional of how you're going to show up as a business. Not just individuals make up businesses, right? But then how do businesses show up on their allyship journey? The communities they want to serve. So I think that is just, there's no going back. And I think as we started this conversation, the thing I want to end with is, really thinking about this next chapter of work, and that what that means for bringing more women and caregivers back into the workforce, how to continue supporting working families. And I think, many offices are announcing from a US perspective, starting to go back in the April-May timeframe, and what inclusion looks like now in a hybrid workforce. What does that mean when some of us are working from home and some of us are in the office? And how can you, again, make sure that everyone feels seen, heard, belong, and recognized?
Yeah. I love all that. I love the business case and the human case. I mean, they're so intertwined. There is a big market out there. And like you said, if you want to be relevant to the future consumer, DEI is not going away. The tipping point has tipped. Like we are more diverse and we're going to continue to get more and more diverse. So keep that in mind, but also do it holistically so that it doesn't look like a one and done, check the box.
No, it doesn't. And I'm talking about the multicultural consumer. We didn't even get to intersectionality, the LGBTQ plus community, veterans, individuals with disabilities. It is not just for individuals who are members of those communities, but allies as well. And the spending power in totality of 100%. All of that is huge.
100%. So good. Well, Mita, I so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for the gift of the Brown Table Talk. Listeners, definitely subscribe there. We'll link to that in the show notes. And let us listeners know, are there any one takeaway or one thing you'd like to leave folks with that we haven't discussed yet?
Let's go back to the beginning of this conversation, which I know you and I are both passionate about, and also coming out in your book, which is how can you be an ally? And allyship starts at home. Inclusion starts at our kitchen tables. Those little kids that we're raising become adults who go into workspaces and workplaces. So be really intentional about the language you use. I always say, saying things like lazy, crazy, strange, weird, odd. Those are things that are like the gateway to stereotyping, which leads to hate. So just be really intentional about how we're showing up for all of the young people in our life and how we're role modeling, because you can make a big difference, and it starts at our kitchen tables.
Oh yeah. The word crazy, I'm really trying to eliminate that from my vocabulary, and it's incredibly difficult. And I notice it everywhere. But like you said, weird, any judgmental language, right?
Yeah.
It's the gateway to
Anything
stereotypes.
that starts othering people.
Yep.
Right? So if I'm having why do you want to describe that person that way? Like, why do we think they're lazy? Why do we think they're strange? Why do we think they're odd or funny? Like, funny because they tell great jokes. Okay, good. I get that. Funny because they look different. No.
Yeah.
We don't use that language to describe people. And that's where we have to really be intentional and educate our children, all of our children.
I love the concept too. I think I got it from, oh gosh, was it the 28 days about white supremacy? I'm not saying the title right, but she talked about being a good ancestor in this book. Oh my gosh. It was such a game changer for me to think about how do I want to leave the world, right? How do I want to make it better for the next generation? And oftentimes we think about how to please our ancestors, which is not the point because that perpetuates the status quo. We should be thinking more about how we can create a better world to leave behind for the next generation. And like you said, like these kiddos, like they become the future worker. And, doing the work I do to address adult behavior is much more difficult than getting it to the root when it starts to form earlier in life. So start this conversation earlier, be mindful about the words you model for this next generation too. Mita, I'd love for our listeners, other ways to follow you, obviously on LinkedIn. So Mita Mallick. I'm so sorry, I'm having trouble.
No, Mita Mallick. No worries.
Mallick. Once I get a name in my mind, it's like
it's hard. I know it's hard to undo it, but I know you're trying.
Mita Mallick. Look her up on LinkedIn. So Mallick. Brown Table Talk, but other ways that listeners can connect with you.
I am a contributor for Entrepreneur. I love to focus on founders of color and share their stories and journey. There's a lot of great profiles that I've done. And so please take a look and please support some of those founders with your wallet. That's another important way to be an ally. So you can find me there, and also a contributor for Harvard Business Review. I'm on Twitter barely. I have a photo on Facebook and I'm on Instagram, but LinkedIn is sort of my primary place to follow me and connect with me.
I love it. Well, thanks, Mita, for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Allies are necessary for positive change. If you are on the journey to becoming an ally, we invite you to participate in our brand new Lead Like an Ally online program, or get a copy of our new book, Allyship in Action, available on Amazon. Both are helpful tools that meet leaders where they're at and help provide tools for professional and personal settings. Head over to nextpivotpoint.com to get started today.